same kind of rooms where I used to play guitar and sing, which I'm not going to do now. I'm just going to talk about some nerdy topic. But it feels good to be in the same kind of setting. So, my name is Geert Bevin. I'm the CTO of a small Belgian company. I started a RIFE project and did a whole lot of sibling projects that use RIFE and are real-world, open-source, downloadable demos that you can use to learn the framework with. And recently, I've been voted Java champion. Yay! There are some others over there. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The essentials of RIFE, what metaprogramming is about. I'll talk about continuations, and then at the end, if we've still got time for it, I'll talk about how to do some simple database stuff and to show that RIFE really is a component framework. And we'll see how it goes in terms of time. Usually the talk that I do tries to really explain all the concepts, but this time I kind of opted for a more hands-on approach, so I'm going to show actual demonstrations of how the coding is done and then explain it in line. Feel free to ask comments if you've got any. At each time when I switch to another topic, I will ask for it, and then you can just shoot them out. Right? So let's first talk about the essentials. Does anybody know what RIFE is? Who has actually read the first page of the website? Wow, that's good. So I can summarize it as a full-stack component framework to quickly and consistently develop and maintain Java web applications. Now, usually I will go into 20 slides about the explanations of every small little detail in here, but I'll just highlight some of the most important parts. So it's a full stack. That means that it's not just a web application framework. We really take care and have got our own implementations of all the layers in the stack. And I will detail that later. That, however, doesn't mean that you're limited to using those layers. You can easily integrate with Spring, with Hibernate, with JDO, with all the usual suspects. Right? The benefit that you've got from it is that since each layer has been created to talk together, you've got zero configuration to get started, and you're really set up to do high-level tasks very easily and very quickly. And if you've got to do some functionalities that are not available, you can share, for example, data sources and use Hibernate to do so, or other frameworks that give you those capabilities. So it's a component framework in the sense that everything that you write in the web framework is implicitly a component. Each page is a component, and you can, without any modifications, just use it as a portlet or as a subset or as a site. Everything is componentized. And also in the whole design of the framework, we've got all the layers that compose the whole stack. Well, you can just use an individual layer. We've got users that, for example, just selected the database support. Why? Because they needed a very small way of doing database support in mobile phones. So they just used that, and it's about 600 Ks, and that's exactly what they need to do, without any overhead. And they've got a nice API for doing so. Right? Without using any of the web stuff, without using any of the templating. So you can really pick what you want. We also focus on maintainability. So of course, recently there's been this whole hype about Ruby on Rails and getting really productive, and wow, I created a blog in 10 minutes. I don't know how many times you create a blog in 10 minutes, but afterwards, you will have to maintain your applications, and that's why the most effort goes. So at certain locations, we rather opted for explicit declarations of the things that are going on, instead of making it as fast and as easy as possible. Because you will really get a benefit from that afterwards. Okay? And we still focus on web applications. It's a framework that has got the web in its mind, which means that the web engine is a component engine that totally gears towards web applications. You will not be able to write a component that you will then be able to reuse through the flow to write a Swing application with it. No. Because, in our opinion, that's too detached. To be able to be really productive with a web application framework, you have to understand the concepts of the limitations of the web, of HTTP, of how a user cannot really be identified unless you work with that. So we opted for really going to that direction instead of abstracting it totally. So that's a little bit an overview of what we try to do with the project. So what's the state of it? It's been in development since the year 2000, and we've been using it for projects since the beginning. It's actually totally driven by customer projects, right? So it's not something that we started late at night in our room and then after 5 years, oh my God, I want to go speak at presentations, let's open source it. So no, we really use it to create applications, and we've got our whole component stack for creating forums, blogs, to-do lists, online stores that we reuse across customers and are able to customize so that we as a small company provide a lot of value for a little price. That was our starting point. Right? So for the moment we've got about 3,500 downloads a month. One of the sites that we did with it, I can't speak of the numbers of other users, but this is one of our biggest sites. It's not bad. It's about 10 million hits a month, 740,000 page views a month for one single site, a community site. Very active, totally customizable. People had different roles, so each administrator would only see the functionalities that they would see inline in the page and stuff like that. So not a simple UI to develop, and quite some custom functionalities for each different roles. And then it's been used by big companies also. Facebook, which is one of the biggest American sites, is using RIFE now to demonstrate their developer API, and Greenpeace has been using it for a long time for a number of their sites also. So, I talked about the full stack, right? Now, saying that it's got everything you need is a very bold statement. Of course, it hasn't got everything you need. But it's got a good set of functionalities to get you started with 90% of the things that you would want to do in your web application. So this is a broad overview. We handle database support, we've got lifecycle management to start up your application. Every individual part that participates in it is clearly defined and starts up with a well-known lifecycle. We've got templating, metadata, content management, the whole web part of course, then external services and common services. I will quickly switch to the next slide because normally I will detail each and every one in a lot of detail, but this is what I'm getting to after about 10 minutes. What I'm going to not do now. Interesting part today is this part. So the web engine has got flow control and state handling. It's got components, and we've got something which can't be found in any other framework, which is support for continuations. I'm going to talk quite a bit about that today. So we've got a content management framework that's very similar to the JCR. Has anyone seen the InfoQ talk an hour ago? It was very interesting, wasn't it? The way how they use the content repository and using URLs to identify content elements. Well, we do exactly the same thing. So we'll be in a familiar space there. I'm not going to detail everything. We also integrate with Ajax and DWR just as InfoQ did for web work, so that you can benefit from the whole web stack before the DWR action executes and stuff like that. Okay, so those were the essentials. Are there already questions about this? No? Okay, let's just continue then. Let's talk about metaprogramming. Metaprogramming is a way to write programs that write other programs. So you will work with a high-level domain-specific API. You will, for example, say, that thing here has got a maximum length, right? And that will drive other functionalities. It will, for example, drive the fact that a form has been generated with a field of a maximum length. It will drive that the column in your database is generated with a maximum length for that column. It will drive the validation of that data that's been submitted with that maximum length. So by specifying one instruction, it drives the rest of the framework underneath. Okay? So you work with a very high-level API. Now, the thing to realize about that is, since it drives something else, you still have all the capabilities to delve deeper and customize whenever you have an exceptional situation. Whenever you need to do something that a high-level API doesn't provide you with. So what you end up with, you can really concentrate on your business logic. You just express what you want and don't have repetition of trivialities of boilerplate code. You only have to code those if you really need it. Right? So let's start with the highest level abstraction, RIFE CRUD. RIFE CRUD is a sibling project. It's a very small project that actually takes up about 50K. It's a jar of 50K. That only does metaprogramming. The only thing it does is it allows you to provide a bean with metadata, and then it will generate an entire site out of that. Right? It's a little bit like Ruby on the Rails' scaffolding. I suppose that most people have seen those videos. It's a little bit like that, except that it's easier to integrate, and I'll talk about that later. So let's show a little demo about this. So what I've got on the desktop here is 2 zip files, right? That I downloaded I've got the RIFE Jumpstart zip file, which is just an archive that you download from our website, and then the Derby database zip file. So RIFE Jumpstart allows you with a way to bootstrap your applications. You will just unzip it, and you've got Jetty set up for you. You can just open the project file in, for example, IntelliJ IDE or Eclipse or NetBeans, and get immediately started with coding, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to open the Jumpstart, and I'll open the project file in IntelliJ IDE. So it's just loading in the classes, scanning the class path. And I'll just first run this project so that you see what you get out of the box. Okay? So I just opened it, I run that project, and you will see RIFE starting up. Then I'll switch to the browser and visit the first page. So that's what you get with RIFE Jumpstart, right? You're up and running in 30 seconds. And now you will just go in, customize the files, and play with it. We start almost every project with RIFE Jumpstart. It's got some functionality set up as demonstrations. You can easily strip those out. But it's a very nice way of starting the development. Additionally, it's completely set up, because RIFE supports that, for on-the-fly reloading. And you will see that during the demonstrations. There are very rare occasions where I have to restart the servlet container. I can just make a change and reload in the browser, and you're done. Right. Okay. So I'm going to demonstrate RIFE CRUD. The way that I'm going to do this is by building a very simple blog with news items and categories. We'll have news items that can be ordered in categories. I will create the beans, Java classes that do so, then create a metadata for that, and automatically generate the entire site. Right? So I'm stopping the application now because I will be putting in a new jar at the end. I will be putting in the Derby jar, so I will need to restart it. Let's just create a new package, and then the first bean, which is the news item bean. Right? So news item. I create a class, and then I just do something. This is very stupid stuff. I create an integer that will be the primary key. Then I will create a date that will be the moment at which the news item has been created, right? And then afterwards I will create a foreign key. The foreign key, which is the category, right? So that the news items can be structured into categories. Then the title, and of course news items also have text, and we will add an optional image, which people can upload, and that will be handled by the content management framework. Okay? And then I'll just create the setters and the getters for this. There's really stupid stuff going on here. So we're done with that. Let's quickly create a second bean, which is the category bean. It is very simple. Category. It also has got a primary key, which is an integer. And then I've got a name. And I'll create the setter and getters for those. Okay. So this is stupid stuff. There's nothing special going on here. Just plain old Java beans without any real functionality. Now, when you're talking about metadata, metaprogramming, what you want to do is reuse those classes maybe with Hibernate or Spring. And what you really don't want is them to be polluted with any RIFE imports. Right? That would be sucky. Or you might want to create a site from existing Java beans, and you only have access to the bytecode. Okay? It can be very handy to create a quick reporting administration interface. Nothing fancy, just a quick reporting administration interface. So RIFE supports something that we call metadata merging. It simply works by using a naming convention. So you've got here the category and the news item beans. When you create additional classes called news item metadata and category metadata, you will just set up in Java all the metadata statements that will configure additional behavior, and behind the scenes, through its class loader, RIFE will merge those two classes, so that for you as a developer, when you use it elsewhere in the code, those are just one entity that have got both functionalities, and I will demo that to you. This means that they are totally isolated, and you get the benefits of the rich metadata API that RIFE provides you with. Okay? So I'm going to create those metadata classes. So I'm going to create a news item metadata class. And you can see here now that I will type the first metadata instruction, which is the constraint. We call metadata constraints. Those are the statements that you use to create metadata. Okay? So in this case, we'll first create a constraint that talks about the bean itself. And I will say that the ordering is by default the moment. So we'll just order if the beans are listed by the moment. It will be in a decreasing fashion. Right? Be decreasing fashion. And I will order if the moment happens to be the same. The second parameter will be the title, right? And I'll create another metadata entry which is about the property itself, and I'm just saying that the ID here is an identifier, right? So it will be a primary key. And for the moment property of the news item bean that we created before, I'm writing it all at hand now instead of using the macros. I indicate it has to be listed whenever the reporting happens. And I'll give it a special format, which means that for the input of the data and the formatting of that date, it will use the regular date format that Java provides. Right? Okay. Another metadata statement here using constraints is by providing a many-to-one constraint that will link to the category bean. So it will automatically set up a select list whenever the form is generated for it. And the last constraint here is a title, where I will enter the maximum length that I already talked about. And this one is quite interesting because it will show how the content management framework integrates, right? So I'm just saying that that it's mandatory, it isn't null, it can't be empty. And then in the next constraint, I'm saying that it's got a specific MIME type. It's got the XHTML MIME type. Okay? Here. Now what happens is, whenever the data is submitted through the form, RIFE knows, thanks to this metadata declaration, that it expects XHTML. So it will automatically validate it for you. You don't have to do anything. And when it's validated, instead of storing it in the database, it will store it in a content repository out of your database so that you can still access it through the content repository URLs, or that you can use all the functionalities that the content repository provides you with. For example, searching, versioning, all these kinds of things. Okay? And of course, in this case, I don't want to create a whole HTML template. I want to create just a fragment. Right? So it would only validate it as such. And the last step is even nicer. An image. I'm going to upload an image with a certain MIME type. And this means that RIFE will convert it into a ping MIME type. It doesn't mean that it expects a ping image. Okay? What RIFE actually does, it will try to interpret the bytes, or you can also use an input stream, that arrive. It will check the class path for all the supported imaging libraries that are available, and then try to read it in the order that you set that it should try to read it. By default, there is a logical order set up, so it will first try the ones that have the better quality and stuff like that. But in practice, you can even upload Photoshop images if your imaging library is simply in the class path. And then afterwards, once it's loaded in, it will be converted to ping and saved into the content management backend as a ping image. And you can go further, because when you've got content, you can also attach attributes to it. And in this case, I will attach an attribute that says that the width is limited. So if someone uploads a larger image, it will be automatically rescaled. Okay? You can also attach transformers and stuff like that, but I'm not showing that here. And I'm indicating also that it's a file upload, so that I don't have to handle that specifically. It will be done for me. Now I'm going to create another metadata class, which is for the category bean, right? So it's exactly the same. Naming convention. I'm creating a bean metadata declaration so that the order of the names of the category is the way how they are ordered, which is a natural way. And then I'm adding something which could look a little bit complex at first, but you have to think about it. It's a textual identifier. So when you've got a foreign key and you've got a drop-down list to be able to select them, you don't want the ideas of the categories to be presented. You want to be able to customize that. Maybe you want to localize it, or maybe you want to just create a nice string, or just in this case, to demonstrate it, I will generate a string that has the ID of the category and the name of the category so that you can see how it goes. So I'm just returning this. And for each entry in the drop-down list, it will then generate a textual identifier according to the rules that you set up there. Okay? And that's it. We're done. Oh, I still have to indicate that the name has got a maximum length of the category. So I'm setting up here the same primary key, and that the name has got 255 in maximum length. Okay? Now, so what I did here is set up my beans in classes, separate classes. I set up my metadata, and those will be merged behind the scenes. Right? So what I have to do now is indicate to RIFE that it has to generate a site for me. Okay? And for that, this is how we declare sites. It's just XML, but it could be in Java, it could be in Groovy. And I'm using a special CRUD protocol that RIFE CRUD has registered itself with. And also I'm indicating to the CRUD protocol that it's a generated site for the news item that starts with this prefix in URLs. And it should generate a site for the categories that starts at another prefix. And at this point in time, I'm done with the sites. I've got a web page at this point in time. Now, of course, what I really want to do is to store all that information in a database, right? So what I still have to do is generate a database structure. I could do that manually, and then RIFE will figure out the maps in between the types and stuff like that. But the easiest way, when you're doing stuff like this, is to just set it up through the life cycle of the application. You will indicate to RIFE that it has to create that structure. I'll do that now. So the life cycle, this is something I forgot to mention. So I have to set up the data source, of course. I will connect to a Derby instance. I will put in the jar afterwards. The life cycle is done through participants. So in this case, you've got a configuration, a data source, users, the site, which is the actual website. I indicate that a certain property is present for the entire application, which is the data source. So that will propagate through everything in the application and be injected through IOC. And I'll add an additional participant, which in this case will create the site. The database structure, sorry. So it's named create CRUD structure, which is quite intuitive. And the only parameters that I've got to provide again is the class name of the category, and the class name of the news item. And that's it. So what I'm just doing in the next step is taking the jar of the Derby database, and I will drop it inside the lib directory of Jetty. Okay. I'm taking the Derby jar, dropping it in, going back to the IDE project. Of course, I've got to add it to my class path in my project setup, otherwise it will not be found. So that's what I'm doing there, adding it to the class path. And we're done. So what we're going to do now is just start up the project. Initially, it will create a database structure. So you've got the same startup statements. We'll pause a little bit because it's creating the entire database in Derby, and then afterwards it will create a table structure. It will create the sequences, the foreign keys, everything for you. So it has created the content management structure and the tables for the news item and the category. And I'm visiting that website and I'm done. So that's what I get out of the box immediately. And you'll see that it's still a little bit, it's not really nice because I've got generic labels here. Because everything is set up for localization, which is the first customization step. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to create, by using traditional Java localization key values in property files, set up the localization for that generated application. And that again is looked up through naming convention, right? So the admin properties file for the English language, which I just created, the admin properties file, I just copy-pasted it from another application here. And that's the thing that I set up, right? So that will show nice messages in the application. And I still have the capability for each individual bean creating another property file that will customize those messages even more, so that I can really create an easier application to work with and target it to what is actually going on in the interface. So I'll create another properties file, which in this case is for the category bean, right? Again, it's for the English language. I'll create it. I'm copy-pasting again from another window because I'm not typing all that out. So in this case, it will mention the categories in all the messages. And I'm doing exactly the same thing for the news items afterwards. Okay? So this is the easy, first way of customizing what a customer sees, if you would ship such an interface to a customer. Okay, I'm copy pasting again. And let's see what it looks like. So I'm going back to the browser. I haven't restarted my application. And I'm reloading, and nothing happens. Oh, why is that? It's because I put that file in the wrong location, so I'll just take it here and drop it in the right location because I put it, naming convention can't find it. So I'll put it where it belongs, right? It should be actually in the localization directory for the CRUD functionality. It moves it. Let's go back to the web browser and press reload, and everything else will. Okay. Now I'll just use it a little bit so that you can see what goes on. I'm adding a first category, and a second category. It indicates, if you saw that it was mandatory with a little star automatically. You see? It indicates that automatically, generates that on the fly. It does the validation for you. Right? Now I'm creating a news item by using the textual identifiers for the categories. I'm adding a title. This is something that I entered in the localization. You can provide for every property custom help text so that your customers have to enter something so that you can give them instructions, for example. Or legends, like here, I can do a legend so that the width is limited. I added some invalid HTML. I forgot to close the B tag, so it has validated it and said it was invalid, right? And I'm submitting that, and now it goes through. So you can browse it, and then you see the properties that have been indicated as being listed. Now I'll add an image. So I'll just take an image that I took with photo booth on my Mac. And you'll see there at the bottom that it's actually an image of 640 by 480, and it's got the size of 68K. So after it's uploaded, because the metadata said that it had to be resized to 120, we'll do so. We'll see that after this has been submitted. So it's now getting in the image, resizing it. When you browse it, it shows up the right size. All done for you. I'll add a second news item. Or just some additional HTML. You really have the capabilities of read HTML here, and we'll validate it as a fragment, so inside a div, which means that you can really do anything there, and it will still be validated as valid HTML. If you would not have indicated in the metadata declarations that it was a fragment, it will expect an entire HTML file here with the HTML tag at the beginning and stuff like that. Right? So I'm uploading this again. We'll do, again, resize it, and use it as an image inside the content management framework. We've got a second image. Okay. And you can see that it adds paging by default. I don't have enough items to show that, but it does that out of the box. And the last news item, I didn't show the validation, so I'm just going to do that. So that's mandatory also. Pick that up. And there you go. You can, of course, delete news items. And that's it. So that's what RIFE CRUD provides you. Okay? Which is very handy in certain situations. Of course, in other situations I can't ship this to the customer. But I can still try to customize it as much as possible. So this is a quick overview of what RIFE CRUD stands for. You saw that it reloaded on the fly. It's totally runtime based. It generates no code at all, so you can't accidentally check in the code, which is great. It's driven by a domain model. Constraints that you saw are written in Java, so you can use everything your IDE provides you with. You can use auto-completion. You can even do optional constraints if in certain cases only certain metadata applies. And something to realize is that those two sites that I created, sub-site and then with the CRUD protocol where I just indicated what the name of the bean was, well, those are actual components in RIFE, in the web framework. So I can use that and put it elsewhere, for example, embedded in another part of the website. They get all the capabilities of the RIFE component architecture. And then you can start customizing it, these functionalities. So I showed the localizations. The first step, of course, to customize the look and feel is to use the CSS file that's included. It's very structured, so easy to do basic modifications. Then You can use the templating language of RIFE, that I will briefly illustrate later, to just inject new layouts. You could also override, for example, only the edit functionality and still use the addition and the browse functionality by injecting new components, which are called elements. And if you want to go even further, the CRUD functionality is available as an API that you can just use from within your own components and do a lot of the boilerplate code on the fly. And everything else, since it's built, you remember well, metaprogramming, it's a way of programming to automatically drive the rest of the framework. Everything is still available. I can use database callbacks to change my data when it's submitted or when it's retrieved and stuff like that. All these things are still available. Okay? So let's briefly talk again about the constraints that you saw in the demonstration, which is how RIFE does the metadata stuff. So it's a rich dynamic. You saw that it was dynamic because it was done in Java. It's not an external XML file. It's actual Java statements that are reloaded, that are executed when they apply, when the metadata has to be read. For each individual bean instance, it doesn't apply for the entire class. You can override conditionally, since it's just written in Java, for each individual bean instance. And properties. So this was a news item we talked about, right? We had these properties. I'm not illustrating the figure here. And I added some additional metadata through constraints, which is external. It augments what a traditional Java bean provides. The Java bean just provides names and types. It doesn't provide any additional metadata for the data structures that are available in there. And then the rest of your application is driven by this. Okay? Structure creation of database, form generation, validation, display, if you've got special formatting, storage either in the database or in the content management framework. All from this central location. Okay. So what do they look like? You saw this. This is a property. I'm just repeating it because it's quite an important concept. It's a basic Java bean. I could change this, for example, to input stream if you don't want to have the image present inside memory. But then your functionality is reduced. Because it's an input stream, you can't do, for example, attach, for example, an image transformer that needs the image present in memory when it, for example, does alpha blending or rotates it before storing it in the content management system, right? It needs to have that present in the memory. So that's why usually I use that. And then in another class, I'm just adding in plain Java the metadata. And behind the scenes, without any setup at all, by just using the naming convention, metadata, RIFE will merge those. It will become one class. Okay? Let's look at the second demo. So what I'm going to do now is create something from scratch. I used RIFE CRUD beforehand to generate an entire section of a site with the capabilities that I indicated with the metadata. Well, I'm now going to write a very simple order checkout process so that you can see what it is like to work with RIFE and create your own components. Okay? So I've got an order data bean. And for the moment, I'm not storing it in the database. This is just a simple process that I will walk through in terms of flow and interaction with the web framework. So I've got all these data elements, the shipping method, the credit card type, the credit card number, and the credit card expiration date. Those are very simple traditional things. I'll create the accesses for them also. And as we saw, I'm now going to create the metadata class for that. Right? So metadata. The same name, order data, and the macro that I set up in ID will automatically fill in the rest. And I'm going on again, just like before, adding those metadata statements that will augment the information that's available by a traditional Java bean. In this case, I'm adding something you've not seen before. I say that the shipping method can only be one of the values that are presented in that list, right? For the credit card type, it's exactly the same. I also say that there only can be those credit cards in those lists. So afterwards, when I will generate a form, it will automatically generate radio buttons with only those values. Okay? Now for the credit card number, a credit card number is, for example, limited to 16, right? 16 length, it has to be minimum that or maximum that. And the expiration date is typically entered as just a month, year. So I'm going to use the Java text formatting capabilities for that. I'm just going to create a simple date format that only contains the month and the year. So that's what's going to be expected when you submit the form. Okay? And now I'll create a RIFE component, what we call an element. So it's called order. Process element is the method that's always called when it's first executed. And in this case, I'm just going to show that there is some output. So I'm going to take a template that I will write afterwards and print it out. Okay? So I'll look up a template here, and I'll write it out. And something to talk about is, remember that I said in the beginning that RIFE needs a declaration. Some kind of declaration to drive the rest. It's not doing everything automatically. For the metadata, you had to declare the constraints. Now in this case, I'm declaring that this class is actually an element, right? And I'm using the annotations declaration method. I can do exactly the same by just using XML, okay? Or I can write a Java statement by using the site structure object by adding that component to the site structure. This is totally up to you. How you declare what, which element does what in a RIFE site, okay? In this case, what I want to do is for the customer to submit his order. We'll submit it through a form, and I'm indicating to RIFE that that submission has got a certain name, so that this is very similar to an event-based model, what events are in our framework. So a submission has got a name, and it expects the data that's provided by a bean, and that bean is declared by its class. So in this case, the order data. This is important because by just declaring this, RIFE is able to generate the entire form and to only expect those values that are available by that bean. And you get protection from data injection and stuff like that because only those values can be submitted. Now in this case now, since you remember, I looked up a template in the beginning of the process element method, I will write that now. You will see that the template is just regular HTML. Okay? I'll detail later in the presentation what our ideas are about templating. It's a little bit of a controversy because certain people don't like it at all. What we've seen is that most of the times people don't like it because they try to look at it the wrong way, and I will explain that. They try to match it against what they think it should be instead of what it really is. So what I'm doing here is just setting up a form with some value placeholders that will be filled in by RIFE. Okay? It will fill in the URL, the hidden parameters, if state has to be passed on. Right? In this case, I will generate a radio button for the shipping method, which will actually be 3 radio buttons. Exactly the same for the credit card type. Right? I indicate that if errors occur, that they should be, for the credit card type, be shown here. And if I want to mark where something is erroneous, it will happen there. So you can see that I set up a whole bunch of macros myself while coding in IDE, so that all these boilerplate things I don't have to code again. Good. Got a question? I'm going to upload those. They are already available on the website for Eclipse and for Xdevelop, and I created these for the presentation actually. So I will upload those. So remember, that was the last page we saw, and the order page that I tried to visit didn't work. Why? Because I haven't notified the site structure that it actually exists. Okay? So I just have to say that the implementation of a component is present to the site structure. Now, there are certain frameworks. I don't know if someone has used Stripes. Has anyone used Stripes? Right? Stripes detects that on the fly, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, I thought you said Stripes.
Okay, no, Stripes, which is a quite recent framework. It also uses annotations, and it scans the class path to find which class might be suitable for a component. Now, that's very well when you work with a small application. But when you've got a gazillion amount of classes and your application starts up, you can go and drink a coffee, okay? And you get into other tricky problems. What happens if you've got to detect, for example, during development that component is not there anymore? You will have to delete it and make sure that it's not present in the file system, which might still be in your build path. And it can lead to quite some hidden frustration. So we opted for explicit declaration, right? So I added it, I'm reloading, and it's present at the order URL. By default, it will take the short class name of the component that I just wrote, right? So, go back a little bit, because that went too fast. So you see here that the whole form has been generated, right? Now remember what I wrote in the process element method. I just got a template and I printed it out. That was the only thing that I did. And I said to RIFE, there is a submission of data of that particular bean. And by analyzing the metadata that it will be merged automatically into it, it knows that a certain form has to be generated with certain metadata. And by providing those template tags, so form, radio, it will generate the radio buttons of the lists in the metadata, right? Now, let's customize the HTML a little bit, because I forgot to add an input button. Right? I'm just adding that. Submit button, sorry. And now we're going to do something. So it just printed out the form but didn't do anything real yet. So I'm just checking if a submission has been sent. If a submission has been sent, I want the order data instance of that particular data that has been submitted. I want to have that, so I get it as a bean of certain class. And I've got that present, right? Now I've got that. And you'll see here that I'm casting the order data instance to the validated interface, right? Now, if you remember, I didn't implement that interface in my bean. What happened? RIFE merged this automatically with the order data and the order data metadata. It merged this into one single class. And it implements all the interfaces that the metadata class implements. And by just casting to it, I get all the functionalities that the interfaces provide. So I can just call the validate method on that bean by casting to that interface. Right? And then, in this case, I'm generating the form explicitly. Why? It's done automatically beforehand with an empty form. But in this case, after the submission has happened, I want to generate a form for this particular bean instance with that particular data. Okay? So that's it. I wrote my component. Let's reload. I added the submit button. And I get an error, right? What does it say? This error says that in the template, it's looking for a block with a certain name. It's looking for a block with the name mark error. It needs that to be able to mark up which fields are erroneous. And it's looking for that because I added this to the template itself. I said, this value placeholder here, mark that particular property. So I'm just going to add a block now, say mark error has got to be, that particular text has to be inserted there whenever there is an error. And in this case, that text, I want it to be actually a CSS class. So I'm naming it mark error. I'm writing the CSS for that, which will be a rectangle, a red rectangle with a border and then red text in it. You know, this is just basic stuff. But you can already see that RIFE showed you an error message and said exactly what went wrong. I just had to copy-paste what was presented in the browser and then act upon it. I can modify on the fly, and then I will reload afterwards because I resolved that error. And I'm reloading, and everything is highlighted. But the error messages are still very generic. So, I'm going to create a block again in the template. A block, mandatory, for all the properties, has to show mandatory. So I'm going to reload, and it shows mandatory, right? Now, afterwards, mandatory was shown in front. I want mandatory to be on top and to have a line break afterwards. So I can add a block again, which is just a naming convention. RIFE looks for these. All the error messages, I could target this for specific properties if I want to, have to be appended with a line break. There you go. They're appended with a line break. And I can use the form. It remembers which radio buttons have been submitted because it's got that data in the bean. I'm going to customize the error message for the wrong length here. So you can really see how that development process happens. You fix a bit, you reload, I have to restart nothing, I'm just continuing within, whatever happens.
Can you add localization?
Yes, no problem. I can can show that to you afterwards. But yes, everything is, because I come from Belgium. And most of my customers need their website in two websites, in two languages, in French and in Dutch. So it's one of the main features. If we would not be able to do that, we would not be able to ship any products. So all the possible validation errors, I've seen them, except for the invalid date format, right? Remember, I said that it had to be a certain format, month/year, so it validates that automatically. Invalid. That's it. Okay. So, what I showed here was just a form that can be filled in. It's a nice iterative process, but at the end, remember this is just a theoretical test case. In reality, we'll not have one big page with just all the steps of the order process and then at the end the summary, which is what I'm going to add now. I'm going to add a summary. So I'm just changing the template again, which is regular HTML. Only got value placeholders and blocks. I'm writing a label, and then afterwards I will again indicate that there is a value placeholder, that something can be filled in there. And I will inject the content for that afterwards in my component implementation. Right? So in this case, again, I take the name of the property, so that RIFE can automatically inject whatever value is present for that property in the bean. Okay. So we've got the credit card number, and then afterwards we've got the credit card expiration date. And you'll see that I added some boilerplate content here. This means that it will show if nothing has been injected. So you can mock up templates with default values that will already show if nothing happens, which is a nice way of seeing what it would look like if something would have happened with it. Right. So what I'm adding here, if the validation succeeded, let's go back a little bit because that went too fast. Okay. So what I'm adding here is, if the bean didn't validate, I'm generating the form again. If the validation succeeded, I'm just injecting whatever values are present in that bean and injecting those into the template. Right? So I'm submitting the form, and it's, in this case, it's still invalid. I'll create a valid submission, and I'll see whatever data that I've submitted. Okay? I'm just adding some stuff. It's not really important. I'll cut this because I don't have a lot of time left. This is just some additional CSS classes to make it look a little bit nicer. Okay? So you saw that RIFE supports a flow declaration. This is how we declare flows. You've got one flow link here. There are also data links. I'm not delving deeper into this because it's a very broad subject, state management and flow and application flow. This is how you declare it in XML. It can be done in other languages also, right? So it creates a clear overview of everything that happens in your application, which is great if someone else takes over your code, because he knows exactly where to look and what is going on, right? You can use XML, Java annotations, Groovy, Janino, all these ways of declaring the same thing. It's your preference. And register your own factories for those, like RIFE CRUD. What RIFE CRUD does, what you saw in the first demonstration, it will generate an entire flow structure by just looking at metadata. Okay? This is just a custom protocol handler. Templating. This is an excerpt of the template. Okay? So I'm just reassuring you, we've had a lot of users, when they started using our templates, said, "What the hell were you thinking of? You're totally nuts. Those weird tags are horrible. They're hurting my eyes." We've heard them all. And then they have all, after having used it about a couple of days, said, "Oh, wow. It's so simple. It doesn't do anything, actually. It's so simple because the principles of the templating engine is, it's just that content." Think about, has anybody worked in PHP? Yeah? Now, why was PHP started? PHP was started as a templating language. And then they added an if statement. And the damage was done. If, while, I don't know what, it became its language. And nowadays, you've got templating libraries for the templating engine, that's PHP. What is templating about? Templating is to provide content that you want to output. Okay? You do that with PowerPoint. Your PowerPoint templates, they don't start magically building themselves, right? They are just a template. And I will assemble them into my final presentation. I will use the blocks and put them into certain locations so that I've got my final presentation built up. And that's exactly how RIFE's templating engine works. You mark up blocks of HTML content with comment tags, for example, but we support 4 alternatives if those comment tags hurt your eyes. So with comment tags, which means if you use a comment tag that is totally invisible, you mark up those blocks, and then afterwards, they will be stripped when the template is printed by default, and you can assign them into value placeholders. And that's it. That's as simple as it is, right? So to compare that with JSP, what most people know, you've got your view, which will set apart data and then actually execute a JSP template, right? Which will use that data, provide content, and then resume the view logic. Okay? Now, in the RIFE model, this is totally different. There is no execution of the template. It's just that content with blocks and values. And you manipulate that, you aggregate content. And then afterwards, you get the result and print that out. It's as simple as that. And what does that give you? You can use templating to create email messages. You can use templating to very easily create REST responses in XML. You simply don't care. It's dead content. It's text that you mark up and you reuse blocks into content placeholders. That's all there is about to it. So we've got only 4 tags. A value tag, that is a value placeholder. A block, that marks up a block, a reusable block. A block value that combines both, so that by default it will show something, because a block by default strips away what's present there. And an include tag, so that you can include other templates. And that's it. That's all you need to know. The main thing is that you have to think about it, it's not executing. Okay? And then we had a component implementation. It's very intuitive, it did exactly what it said. I showed it in Java. You can write it in any scripting languages supported on the VM. It's totally decoupled from any other component, and the flow and state handling of RIFE handles whatever goes on and how information and execution is transferred from one location to the other. Okay. I'm running awfully late. So, normally in 8 minutes we're done. But I know, because I looked at the program, that I still have 1.5 hours before the next presentation starts. So, this is a very interesting topic. It's called continuations, right? And normally I've got 7 minutes left to present this. But if you're bored, by all means, feel free to leave the room and, do whatever. Okay? And if the organizers kick me out, I will have to stop also. And those that are interested, we can continue somewhere else if you want to and stuff like that. Okay. So what are continuations? This is a totally different topic than anything we've seen before in this presentation, right? Clear everything out of your mind. We're starting a new presentation. Hello, I'm Geert Betten. I work for a small Belgian company. We're called UN, and I'm the lead author. Let's talk about continuations. So continuations are resumable markers. What does that mean? You put a marker somewhere in your code, in the Java code that executes, right? And you say, this is the location where, when it hits, I want to pause the execution, right? I want the user to provide information, and then afterwards, I want to resume exactly from that location and restore the whole context in which this execution happened. Okay? This is very similar to what we did in the early DOS days. Read line. Wasn't that great? Wasn't that great? You wanted to have information from the user. The only thing that you did was read line. No multi-threading, no trying to get everything synchronized. No, you had a one-to-one conversation with that user, you provide inputs, and you get the data, and it continues executing. Okay? That's what continuations actually do. So you pause by marking a location in your code, capturing the context around it, and storing it away. Right? In the second step, that could happen at any time. You arrive at the same entry point, and you want to resume where you left off. So you restore the context, inject new context element, and resume the execution where you left off. Okay? So concretely, let's look at some pseudocode. I'll mark up a location with a pause statement, and I will resume it afterwards. That summarizes what I just said. But a lot of people will say, that really looks like a goto, because actually, I jump from here to there, right? That really looks like a goto. Except that whenever that pause hits, it captures all the variables that are present in the context, right? So this is like a safe game when you enter right in front of a boss and you say, man, I only have a little bit life left and I really want to beat this guy, so I save game. And then you enter in, you run into the lair, you beat, and you get totally beat up. So, yeah, no problem. I reload, and I'm in exactly the same context. Everything is restored, and I resume where I left off, right? And you continue hitting at it until you win, and then you drink all the potions, and wow, I'm going to the next level, right? So that's what continuations are about. Let's look at the next step. It captures the context. I wrote a little function that has got a local variable, right? That contains a string. Again, a marker where the execution will pause. And in the global scope, I'm calling that function. Pause will hit, marker will contain the location and the context, and I will resume it afterwards, after having printed out something else. So in practice, this logic will give you, I say, hello there, because it resumed that afterwards, right? If I would not have paused here, it would have been, hello there, I say. Okay? Now the next step is that you saw that it stored the local variable context. Now I'll show that it actually stores it in in an identifiable variable. So I have a first marker. I've got a new function, which is say with a certain argument. I don't have a local variable anymore with the text. I'm saying this. It will pause, put it in a marker. I put it in a separate variable. I'm calling it again.